Well, we left off yesterday with our first glitch. The fact that the cylinder heads have raised exhaust ports meant that the 4 bolts that are above the exhaust ports are a little bit longer than the stock ones. So when we bought our ARP bolt kit, the bolts for the exhaust area were just about 1 inch too short. We're on a ridiculous timeline here trying to get to SEMA show, as you can all imagine. So we had to do what we had to do, as we like to say. We started out with that bolt. That's the one that came with the kit. That's how long of something we needed. We just used studs. So unfortunately, I hate combining studs and bolts. They're all made by ARP and they're all unbelievably strong. It's mostly aesthetically I don't like looking at it, but right now beggars can't be choosers. We had to do what we had to do. So once we got the right combination of head bolts and studs, it was a matter of Graham just putting together the motor, just like normal. Obviously, it was weird to see 4 head studs sticking out of the deck surface while the head went on, but, you know, whatever. Everything, it's a clamp. I mean, it's clamping it down. Put the heads on. That went perfectly. And next step is valve train. So the next thing that had to be done, once the heads were bolted on, Graham pulled out every single stud that holds the guide plates on, put sealant on them, and then retorqued them, just to verify that they were done correctly from the factory. It's not to say that it isn't done, but we've seen stranger things happen. The way we check for push rod length is we use these aluminum adjustable push rods. They're basically just mock-up push rods. They screw in and screw out to adjust for length. We stick them in the perspective slots that they're supposed to be in, and then essentially sweep the motor through its travel looking at where the roller lifter contacts the end of the valve. I mean, I can give you an example here. This is a valve. When a roller lifter should run along it, the goal is to have it run across the top of the valve. You don't want it at one end or the other all the time. You'd like it to sweep across the middle would be the best case scenario. Sometimes it doesn't work that way. I'm going to show you a real good example of a big old nasty cam. And this is probably one of the biggest cams you'll ever see. And this will explain how bad can get when, or how much work it takes when you see how far this thing moves across the top of the motor is what I should say. That one right there, ready? Now if you noticed, it started out at the center of the valve, I should say towards the center of the engine, swept out towards the outside of the engine, and by the time it's done, it's right back towards the center of the engine. It's swept across the top of the valve perfectly. It takes a lot to get that to happen. You know, when you use crazy rock arms like this, these things are like 1:9 ratio. So that all is key. On the motor there that we did for the SS496, it's one of the things we wanted to point out was you can't just stick in the stock push rods. A good example, these push rods are nearly 1 inch shorter than stock Chevrolet push rods. And that's due to, like we said before, that's due to the different lifters that are in it. That's due to the fact that the whole intake and exhaust runners are probably lifted up in the head. And I'm sure that Holley does that so that they flow good. But a good example of what can happen if you pick the wrong push rod or if you don't check your push rods is, let's say you've got a motor that has bolt-on pedestal rockers, or something that's stock that you just torque the rocker down to a certain number of foot-pounds of torque. Well, if you just crank your rocker arm down with the certain push rod that the local Napa store sold you, it could legitimately hold the valves open the whole time. It's never going to build compression. It's never going to run. I mean, it's one of those things where you have to check push rod length, not just if you want it to be perfect, in some cases just to make it run. The next thing that we ran into was one of our own problems. We want this motor to have a nostalgic look. One of the things that's going to do that is this stock-looking 69 Chevelle valve covers. This Chevelle should have these valve covers on it. This is what fits that car. And I believe if you're not going to have a full-on racing engine, I don't want it to look like a full-on racing engine. Let's not forget, I like building sleepers, so this is a sleeper. These valve covers were never meant to be used with big old aluminum rocker arms. So while these rocker arms are absolutely perfect under a set of race valve covers, they aren't meant to be under these stock ones. So one of the things we had to do was machine all the ends of our rocker arms just to make sure everything didn't rub and give us a bunch of headaches. We're to the point now where we went to fit the intake manifold, and you would think, let me just bolt my intake manifold on. Well, that's another good example. If you were at home in your garage and you're bolting on your intake manifold, it would probably have bolted on. The bolts would have gone through the holes and they would have threaded into the holes in the head. But the truth of the matter is the alignment was probably 1/8 of an inch too high. If you want this engine to run good, it's supposed to be a perfect flow port. It's supposed to go from one point in the plenum, like Graham was explaining in yesterday's episode. He was explaining how it came from the plenum, goes through the port, and then into the cylinder head. It's key that that happens, and one of the things to make that happen is by making the intake manifold fit perfectly. So Graham's right now milling the surfaces of the intake manifold, and the next step is to bolt the manifold on. And after that, I would imagine it's going to have to go on the dyno pretty soon because it's getting late again. Well, the day started out with figuring out how to fix our first glitch. That was the exhaust studs. Towards the end of the day, we had to fix the next glitch, was fitting the intake manifold correctly. And you're now looking at a completed, mechanically completed engine. We're pretty much ready to go. It's late tonight. We're going to call it quits right now. We'll get up first thing tomorrow morning and get this thing on the dyno, and that's when the real fun begins. So looks like it's going to be a fun weekend.
Hey, one quick question.
Yeah?
How come it's not painted?
Oh, well, I didn't want to rattle can it, to be all honest with you, so we're going to send it down to the professionals and let them paint it with real paint instead of just me shaking up some spray paint and canning it and making it look like junk.